All right, so speech and the brain is part of what is, we refer to as specialization in the brain and how our brain kind of all works together and all the different lobes, like we talked about by the last time, about how all the lobes have different specializations, but yet they still always work together. So how does the speech work, right? Because we hear and we see and we have to move. So there's a couple areas of the brain that are specialized for speech function. Okay, obviously the visual cortex, right, in the back is heavily involved because the written words are visual stimulation. So you guys are staring at the screen right now and you're being visually stimulated by the picture of the words. Okay, then there's a thing called the angular gyrus, and this is here in the parietal lobe, that transforms visual representations into auditory code. So it's kind of the thing that, when you're reading the words, how you kind of hear it in your head. So the angular gyrus is that. It kind of takes it and transforms visual into auditory. Then we have the Wernicke's area, and the Wernicke's area is in your left temporal lobe. It's important to remember. Wernicke's left temporal lobe. Okay, and this interprets auditory code. This allows us to understand. So right now, as you guys are listening to me speak all of this, it's your Wernicke's area that is kind of processing all of the words that I'm saying, and you're understanding it, and you're taking those associations, and you're figuring out what I'm saying, and you understand it because you have all of these past associations and you know what the words mean. Okay, now on my end of it, okay, the Broca's area. Okay, the Broca's area is located in the left frontal lobe. Okay, Broca's area located left frontal lobe. Okay, and it involves, it's the part of the brain that says move mouth, move tongue, okay, to pronounce the words in the correct way. Okay, so it's via the motor cortex. So the Broca's area, this little spot in the left frontal lobe, okay, that then sends the message to the motor cortex, remember, which is at the back of the frontal lobe, and it's the part that says, okay, move the tongue, move the mouth, and allows the words to be produced. Okay, now, so one of the little memory tricks I like to use, because if you guys haven't caught on correctly, sometimes I honestly think that my Broca's area is slightly broken because sometimes, the words that come out of my mouth, like I don't pronounce things correctly and I get tongue-tied super easily and I like trip over my words. Part of it, I talk fast, so I think maybe my Broca and motor cortex don't communicate fast enough. But I like to remember that if Bailey's Broca's areas is broken, you guys can't, your Wernicke's can't understand. So if Bailey's Broca's is broken, your Wernicke's can't understand. Okay, so just as kind of a little mnemonic to help you to remember that, Wernicke's has to do with your ability to interpret auditory information that you're hearing, okay, where the Broca's area has to do with the actual production of speech. Okay. All right, now plasticity, which we kind of talked about before, in terms of understanding how flexible the brain is. And remember, we saw our little girl who had the hemispherectomy, right? That, so she's literally missing this entire half of her brain. And then we talked about critical periods and those types of things. So when the brain is damaged, especially kind of just these general association areas, okay, it doesn't repair itself, but other parts of the brain can pick up the slack, meaning that we form new connections and we can reassign existing networks, insert some new neurons, and then grown from some new stem cells and stuff like that. So basically, our association areas can reassign themselves and reconnect themselves if something were to happen, like the little girl who had the hemispherectomy. So again, that word plasticity is super important. And also remember, plasticity is better when we're younger. The older we get, the less plastic our brain can be. So again, our brain has two hemispheres, right? Lateralization is what we call it, or going to one side. And remember, left hemisphere, right, left. Okay, and the two hemispheres serve some different functions. Now, how do we know about these differences? Well, brain damage, is how we figure out a lot of the different functions of the left hemisphere in particular. And then brain scans and split brain studies show more about the functions of the two hemispheres and how they coordinate with each other. We'll talk about split brain next time. But just in terms of the two different hemispheres and the specialization that they each have, the left hemisphere tends to have thoughts and logic, okay, details such as, individual trees. Language is predominantly on the left. Remember, the Broca's area is in the left frontal lobe, and the Wernicke's area is in the left temporal lobe. And then it's very linear and literal. And then calculations, mathematical kind of stuff, pieces and details. So the left brain is very analytical. Okay, now the right hemisphere has feelings and intuitions, looks at the big pictures of things, such as look at a forest instead of just a tree. Language, like tone, inflection, and context. So while the left hemisphere does the technical aspect of language, the right hemisphere is what kind of allows us to speak in different ways, to understand the context of what we're hearing, to have the different tones of voice that we use, anger, happy, whatever. The right hemisphere also does inferences and associations. This is perception predominantly occurs in the right hemisphere, and then wholes, including the self. Your ability to recognize your whole self happens in the right hemisphere as well. So, there's been some talk about the left hemisphere is the male brain and the right hemisphere is the female brain. And there's not actually much truth to that, other than some stereotypes about men versus women. We'll debunk a lot of those myths, though, when we start to talk about development and gender development. Okay, so again, big take-home message, left side, right side. Remember that idea of lateralization, and also remember that language is predominantly in your left. Okay, and this will be important next time when we talk about what happens if we cut our corpus callosum, right? And remember, the corpus callosum is the structure that allows the left and right to communicate so that we don't even realize that all of this lateralization is occurring.